Well, it's so good to be with you today. My name's Sam, as the guys introduced, and yeah, it's my privilege to be able to talk to you today. I'm going to jump straight in. Have you ever heard of the Apple ecosystem? The Apple ecosystem. I'm not talking about apples and apple trees. It's something, the Apple ecosystem is something that I'm well and truly stuck in. Some might even say it's influenced the way that I dress. The Apple ecosystem is actually a term coined by Apple themselves to describe the integration of their products with their software. And if I'm boring you, let me put it simply. It's if you have Apple this, then you have to have Apple that. If you have an iPhone, why wouldn't you get a MacBook? Because iMessage, iCloud, AirDrop, it just makes sense. Everything just works together so well, so seamlessly. And that's how they get you, say the cynical. And maybe it is how they get you, but maybe it's not how they pull you in the first place. A few years ago, a well-known author called Simon Sinek, best-selling author Simon Sinek, identified in his book, Start With Why, one of the reasons, if not the reason, why he thinks Apple have consistently seemed to lead the market on innovation, pushing the boundaries on what customers need or want, manage to capture loyal customers in every new market they seem to enter. And Sinek suggests that the key to Apple's success, well, the clue was in the title of his book, they start with why. He suggests that most companies market like this. They say, we make great computers. They're user-friendly, beautifully designed, and easy to use. Want to buy one? But what Apple do instead is they start with why. Sinek goes on to suggest that Apple instead market like this. In everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And we happen to make great computers. You want one? And this approach that Apple have taken is epitomized in one of their recent ad campaigns. I'd play it for you, but our video would get taken down for copyright. But it's an ad campaign called Behind the Mac. And in this one video, Behind the Mac, Greatness, I love what it does. It focuses not on what a Mac does, but rather highlights the type of people who use a Mac and why. And the ad has video footage of well-known artists, writers, actors, athletes, political figures, designers, accompanied with a monologue about the characteristics of great people. And to sum it up, the ad ends with this line. It says, there is a certain type of person who doesn't wait for greatness. They make it. Oh, it's so powerful. And as a teenager, I was caught by this same kind of marketing. When I was in my late teens, I wanted to be a music artist. I was writing songs. I was doing gigs. And I longed for a MacBook because I wanted to be great, like all of the artists that I looked up to, that I admired. And Macs were the tool of choice for creatives. Macs were the best, and I had to have one. I couldn't tell you why they were the best, what made their processors or whatever different from the others, only that the people who were out there achieving their dreams, changing the world, challenging the status quo, they had Macs. And if I wanted to be like them, I needed an Apple computer. I didn't want a Mac because they were great. I wanted a Mac because I wanted to be great. I was caught by the why. And I've used Apple as an example today because they start with a why in everything that they do. It's in every aspect of who they are. It drives their mission. It shapes their values. It informs their decisions. It's their company philosophy. It's their litmus test. It's their marketing strategy. The why is what drives them. And for many diehard Apple fans, whether they realize it or not, this is what keeps them coming back. This is why people pay over the odds for an Apple product. People don't just pay for the beautiful design, they buy into the vision behind it. And this is more than just clever marketing, right? Because Apple have realized something. They've managed to harness something that already exists in us all. It's a desire that we all have. A vision to chase and a why to drive us. You know, whether it's the desire to make a difference, to be great, to change the world, to challenge the status quo, to succeed, to innovate, to achieve, to be loved. We all have a why that drives us. In fact, in everything in life, all of our decisions are driven by a why, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. Everything we do is influenced by a reason, a why. From our choice of supermarket to our favored mobile phone brand, from our career choices to our relationships. From how we spend our money to how we spend our time, everything is driven by a why. But sometimes we change, right? I mean, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 18. The dream of being a music artist no longer drives me. That's no longer my why. And what happens if that why that we once had no longer drives us? What if what once kept us coming back no longer holds the same value? You know, sometimes the why that was once our driving force disappears and maybe it gets replaced by something else. And as we all grow and change, what we value is bound to grow and change. What might have been once a non-negotiable, it might not matter to you anymore. And the reasons for our daily choices and decisions can change all the time, but the loss of some whys can drastically change the trajectory of our lives. You know, these are maybe some of the reasons why people change careers, end relationships, walk away from family, maybe even lose their faith. And in church, we've been doing this series called The Return. And next week, as the guys mentioned already, we're launching our first on-site service in Norwich for 62 weeks. Man, we are excited about coming back. We're excited about building back our on-site services. We're excited about rebuilding our in-person community through watch parties and picnics in the park. But when it comes to the return for the church globally, for the capital C church, as some call it, the statistics are showing that not everyone is as excited as we are to return to church. Carey Nieuwhof reports that for many churches in America, only 30% of their congregation are returning to on-site church. And could it be that the reasons people used to attend church maybe don't exist anymore? Or is it that the why that kept them coming back maybe no longer has the same pull, or any pull for that matter? For those of you who were part of Proclaimers before the pandemic, maybe you want to think about what kept you coming back. What was your why? Friends? A relationship? Maybe a love interest? Leadership opportunities? To quote the YouTuber Nico Omalana's recent mayoral campaign, was it for the vibes? What was your why? What kept you coming back? And what if that why no longer exists? Or what if over the pandemic you've decided that that's no longer that important to you anymore? Are you going to decide you're not coming back? Are you going to be in that 70% who have decided, I am not coming back? When it comes to church, I believe that really there is only one why that will keep us coming back regardless of how we change and how the world changes around us. And that why is Jesus. And this is the context within which I want to talk to you today. And I understand that that might not be your context, and that's okay. But if you too have a why, if you have a reason that drives your life, I believe you can glean from what we talk about today. So I want to encourage you to keep listening, and maybe you can take away something practical from what we explore. But the Bible says that without vision, the people perish. Without vision, the people perish. If we don't have a why, if we don't have a reason, we lose our purpose and we lose our direction. And as I was preparing this message this week, I felt the need to speak to those who are maybe losing their why, to those who have maybe lost their why, or even to those who want to make sure that they never lose the why. I want us to take a look at a well-known parable in the Bible. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've not. That's okay, but this parable is called the parable of the lost son. And in it and through it, Jesus clearly indicates what his why is, and that's us. And I'm going to read from Luke 15, verse 11 in the NIV. I might paraphrase this a little bit. But it says in verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man that had two sons. And the younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Give me my inheritance. So the father divided his property between them. And not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and he set off to a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth on wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country and he began to be in need. So he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with even the pods that the pigs were eating. He was willing to eat the pigs' food. I just want to give you some context here. At the time, Jesus was speaking to probably a predominantly Jewish audience. And for Jews, pigs were unclean animals. And if this younger son was willing to eat the food of this unclean animal, he had hit a low, low point in his life. And he says to himself, he comes to his senses and says, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And yet here I am starving to death. You know what? I'm going to set out. I'm going to go back to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He came running out and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father, he's not listening. And he says to his servants, quick, bring the best robe, put it on him. Bring a ring and put it on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebration. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. And right now, I want to pause here and just say that if you're listening today, if you're watching today and you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, or maybe you once had a relationship with God, you once had faith and maybe you've walked away, you've drifted away from God, I want to tell you that this account, this illustration of the younger son, this is God's response to you. You are the younger son, and God is the Father who is eagerly awaiting your return. There is nothing that you can do or say to stop God from loving you or wanting you back. And at the end of this message, I want to give everyone an opportunity to respond, an opportunity to return, to come back to the Father. You see, in this parable, we see that the Father's heart is a reflection of God's heart. And God's heart is to see those that are lost come to Jesus, for the broken, the weary, the hurting, to return to the Father's house. See, this is what we mean at Proclaimers when we say that our vision, our why, is to see the salvation of our city. We want to see people return to Jesus. And now this parable, it doesn't end here, okay? In fact, I wonder if this parable should have been called the parable of the two lost sons. Because it's actually the account of the second son, the older son, that I want us to focus on today. And I'm going to pick up in verse 25. It says, meanwhile, all this is going on. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, the servant replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him safe and sound. And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered all of your property with prostitutes, come home, what do you do for him? You throw him a party. You kill the fattened calf. My son, the father replied, you are always with me and everything that I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. For me, this parable is a parable of two halves, of two perspectives. For the father and the younger son, it's a story of a joyous return, of redemption, of celebration. But not if you look through the eyes of the older brother. For him, this is about betrayal and bitterness. He feels that he's been unfairly treated, passed over with no recognition for what he's done or the efforts that he's put in. It blows my mind how the same story can be perceived so differently, how the same moment can produce completely different reactions in the father than it does to the older son. I think, simply put, the reason is because their hearts were not aligned. The why that drove them, that influenced their decisions, that shaped their dreams was no longer the same. The son couldn't celebrate with the father because his heart was not in the same place. And what I want us to do today is unpack this parable a little more with the hope of understanding how we can lose the why, or how a why dies. And the first point that I want us to write down, if you're taking notes, which you should be, because we are a church that values taking notes, whether that's paper or digital, I want you to write this down. Number one, distance distorts the vision. Distance distorts the vision. And the first thing that I want to point out, the first thing that I want us to note in this parable is that when it comes back to focus on the older son, note where he is. In verse 25, it says, meanwhile, all this party preparation is going on. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. He was out in the field. When the younger son came home, the older son wasn't in the house with the father. He wasn't there ready to prepare the party. He was out in the field. And I wonder whether time spent out of the house, away from the father, had begun to impact the older son. Had distance distorted his vision? Had he started to lose sight of the why? For those of you who don't know, I am short-sighted. These glasses are for real. Believe it or not. I have to put them back on because I can't read my notes without them. But the further away I get from something without my glasses, the harder it is for me to see the details. And the same is true for the why. The more distant we become from the why, the vision, the harder it is for us to align ourselves to it. You know, this is the reason why companies like Apple, for instance, invest so much in ways to keep their employees close to the vision, close to the why, connected with the why. It may not come as a surprise to you, but I used to work for Apple. Probably explains some of the... But when I was working there, I'm not sure I'm supposed to share this, but it's okay. It was a while ago. When I was working there, they gave all employees something they called the Credo. It was basically a pamphlet with their vision statement for their employees. And just to give you a gist of what it said, the first line says this: "We are here to enrich lives, to help dreamers become doers." See, Apple understand that the employees furthest away from the house, Apple Park, HQ, are the ones most in danger of losing the why behind the what. The further you are from the house, the further you become from its vision. Number one, distance distorts the vision. Number two, if you're taking notes, because you should be, because we are a church that values taking notes. Number two, you can't remove a why without replacing it. You can't remove a why without replacing it. The second thing I want us to take note of is why the older son was out in the fields. It wasn't just maybe a one-off occurrence. I thought that maybe he was just out there having fun. But he wasn't pulling a Theresa May and running through the barley fields for a jolly. He was out there working. In the Message translation, he said he was returning from the fields after a day's work. He was out there working. Now, there's nothing wrong with working. As one pastor wrote on social media, you know, work is important. In fact, it's holy. But the problem for the older son is that work had become the why. The work had become the why. It'd become the why instead of a way to see the why fulfilled. You see, we can't remove a why without replacing it. And when we lose sight of the why behind the what, whether it's intentional or unintentional, we will find a new thing to drive us. We will latch onto a new vision or a new motivation. And in many cases, the what or the work, that is what ends up determining what our new why is. For instance, if you serve on team in church, but you no longer connect with the vision of the church, most likely the why that will keep you serving is going to be linked to what you get out of serving. And if the why is not to see people saved, it will become something else. And in the absence of the Father's why, the absence of what the Father values, we go searching for something else to drive us. And more often than not, the new why is based on what society values. Feelings, accolades, money, recognition, my best life. And I think this is what happened to the older son. He'd lost sight of what the Father valued, and in turn, he'd replaced it with what he thought his service deserved. And we see this in his reaction, his outburst. He says, "Look at all these years I've been slaving for you, and you've given me nothing in return. You didn't even give me a goat. Look at all the times I accepted on PCO. You never gave me a shout out at All In. Look at all the times that I attended even though I didn't want to. Look at all the times that I dedicated to bring my kids to kids' church. Look at all the times that I was here. Look at all the things that I've done." The older son was expecting rewards, recognition because of his work, because he wasn't serving the vision, he was serving himself. His why was not what he could give, but what he could receive. And the thing is, he had forgotten that the Father had already given him everything. And when we lose the why behind the what, we end up replacing the why. And when it comes to church and serving in a church context, I think this is one of the reasons why people so often get burnt out and disillusioned with church, is because they forget that serving is not why we serve. And if you're feeling bitter or resentful, or maybe you can relate more with the older son than with the father, can I ask you, what has your why become? What is the reason that kept you coming back? And now we've seen the death of the why. I want us to look at how we stop ourselves from losing that why, or if we have already lost it, how do we get it back? Again, number one, write it down because we are a church that values taking notes. Reduce the distance. Come back to the Father's house. If we want to keep the why alive in our own hearts, we need to understand the Father's heart. We need to know what moves him. We need to learn to be on the lookout like he is. How do we do this? By building a relationship with the Father, by being found where he is. In John 12:26, it says, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be." If we want to serve the vision, we must be found where the Father is. And maybe your first step is literally just to come back to the house, the church, the body of Christ. Surround yourself with other people who are driven by the Father's why. Utilize watch parties, Sunday evening services, picnics in the park. Take the opportunity to be back in the room, close to the atmosphere of God. Be found serving in the house of God, in the Father's house. Be found building community in the Father's house. Be found in the Father's house. But most importantly, be found with the Father in the Father's house, not just in his house. So number one, reduce the distance. Number two, keep the why high. You may have heard this one already because it's a good one. Keep the why high. Make the why the focus, not the what. If you're feeling bitter or resentful, or you feel you're losing touch with the why of the house, most likely you've become more about the what than the why. You've become more about the doing than why we do it. And if you find yourself focused on what you're doing or what you stand to lose or gain, maybe it's time for you to refocus on the why and why we get to be part of this incredible thing called church. So practically, how do we do this? How do we keep the why high? Really simple way is to make it personal. A why that drives your life is one that you've bought into. You know, the why that Apple has, may keep you buying laptops until the price point pushes you away or someone else comes out with something cooler. But a why that changes the trajectory of your life is one that you own. It's not just someone else's vision, it's your vision. Own it, make it personal. And through the parable of the lost son, Jesus illustrates what his why is. It's us. It's seeing every man, woman, and child return to him, to come to a relationship with him. So how do we make that personal? Who is that lost son or daughter that you desperately want to come to know Jesus? In a second, I'm going to count to 3, and then I want you to write down the name of the person that you're thinking of. I want you to write it down because we're a church that values taking notes. You don't have to share it with anyone. You don't have to tell anyone, but I want you to write it down. You ready? 1, what name is popping into your mind right now? 2, which face can you see in front of you? 3, write it down. And what I want you to do is to pray for them every day. Set a reminder, alert on your phone. Stick their name on the fridge if you want to. Whatever works for you. Make it personal. Own it. Keep the why high. Friends, let's not just reduce the church down to our why substitutes. Being part of a church is not just about being part of a social club. It's not just a place for leadership opportunities. It's not just a place to hone your skills or launch a career. It's not just a place to drop your kids so you can have some time off. We exist as a soul-saving station on the edge of hell. There are too many people longing to come back to the Father's house for us to not take it seriously. And if you're maybe on the edge, if you're maybe thinking about not coming back to church, can I speak to you right now? Don't do it for you, do it for them. Let's not lose sight of what really matters. Let's not become like the older brother. Let's imagine, just for a second, Proclaimers 2026. That's 5 years from now. what impact do you see us having? How many people do you think we could reach? How many lost sons or daughters will return to the Father's house in that time? I believe if we choose to model ourselves after the Father's heart and keep the why high, I believe that we could see an incredible season for proclaimers. If we choose to focus not on what we could gain or what we stand to lose, but on what we can give to further the vision, we will see God move through this house, through his house.